So I decided this afternoon I wanted to do something to reward everybody, and I'm going to tell you a little secret. I'm going to tell you of all the buildings in the world that I visited, I'm going to tell you my favorite building. In fact, I'm going to show it to you. It's this building right here. Now, this is in Dallas, Texas. It's the Renaissance Tower, and you can tell by looking at it that it is not the most beautiful building in the world. It's certainly not the tallest building in the world, but there's a very special reason why this is my favorite building. And it's because this building, for many years, was the headquarters of the Blockbuster Corporation. Yeah. And more importantly, there was a meeting that took place in this building in the year 2000 that profoundly changed my life as an entrepreneur and changed the trajectory of this little company that I was running called Netflix. Now, back in the year 2000, Netflix was in a very different spot than it is today. We were young. We were about 2.5 years old. We were very small. We had less than 100 employees. And I think that year we were probably on track to do maybe $3 million in sales. Unfortunately, we were also on track to lose nearly $50 million. Now, you don't have to be an economist to recognize that when you have $3 million of sales and $50 million of losses, it's not very sustainable. So, being prudent entrepreneurs, we decided to do what entrepreneurs do and do something called seek strategic alternatives. In other words, sell this thing. Now, the obvious strategic alternative was Blockbuster. But in the year 2000, Blockbuster was in a very different place than we were. To start, we had 100 employees. Blockbuster had 60,000 employees. They had 9,000 stores. We were on track to do $3 million in sales. They were on track to do $6 billion. We were nothing to them. So of course, when we called up trying to get a meeting, we'd email, we'd find go-betweens, nothing, no response. Until a few months later, as luck would have it, we were at a corporate retreat. We were in the mountains outside of a little city called Santa Barbara. And you all probably have watched enough TV to know that in Silicon Valley, we're pretty casual. And when you go on a retreat, we're even more casual. And so all I had brought with me on this retreat were shorts, sandals, and some t-shirts. And wouldn't you know it, that's when Blockbuster calls and says, "We'll see you tomorrow morning in Dallas." And we're saying, how are we going to get from Santa Barbara to Dallas by tomorrow morning? So we did the prudent thing that people who are $50 million in the hole should do. We rented a corporate jet. And we flew to Dallas, and we took a cab and went up to the 25th or 26th story of this building. And they brought us into this conference room that seemed like it was the size of this auditorium. This huge conference table made out of an endangered hardwood. And we all came, and don't forget, I'm there in shorts and sandals and a t-shirt. And I remember I was jealous of my co-founder, Reed Hastings, because Reed had on a Hawaiian shirt. I mean, he had buttons. And of course, in come the Blockbuster guys, and they're all wearing their fancy suits, and we get around the table, and we make our pitch that we'll join forces, that we will run the online business, they'll run the stores, we'll find all these synergies, and everybody wins. And they asked a few questions, until they asked the most important question. How much do you think Blockbuster should pay for you? And remember, we were $50 million in the hole. And so Reed goes, $50 million? Well, that's exactly the reaction we got. They laughed at us. And as you can imagine, the meeting went downhill very quickly after that. And it was a long, quiet ride back to the airport and a long flight back to California. But I remember thinking to myself, oh, now we're going to have to kick their butt. And we did. It took us more than 10 years, but eventually we were able to drive Blockbuster into bankruptcy and out of business. I shouldn't applaud something so terrible. But I tell you that story not for gloating over crushing Blockbuster much. I tell it because in some ways it's an inspiring story that just a handful of people with no experience in the video business can take down a $6 billion market-leading company. But what if you're the $6 billion market-leading company? Well, then this story has a very different moral. Because then it says, wow, you never know who's going to come after you. And when they do come after you, they may come after you in a way you never anticipated. In fact, the people who take you down may not be even in business today. What it really says is that if you want to avoid being disrupted, you have to learn how to disrupt yourself. Now, Netflix was certainly a disruptive story, but Netflix is just one of 7 startups I've had a hand in doing. And since leaving Netflix, more than a dozen years ago, I've had a chance to work with scores of early stage companies, with hundreds of early stage innovators and entrepreneurs. I've invested in countless more startups. And looking at all of these companies, ones that I've started, ones that I've worked with, ones that I've invested in, big companies and small companies, I wonder to myself, what is it that allows a small group of people take down a big company? What allows the big companies to defend themselves? And I've realized there are certain common denominators. There's a certain small number of things that these companies do right. And to start, let me tell you some of the things it is not. It is not being in Silicon Valley. You do not need to be in Silicon Valley. I travel all over the world now and work with companies on almost every continent. And I see amazing innovation taking place in little towns, in big cities, in South America, in Asia, all over the world. You do not need to be in one tech center. You don't need any kind of special training. You don't need to have a business degree. You don't need to be a computer scientist. In fact, one of my favorite innovators dropped out of school. He drove an ambulance in Los Angeles, California. He fought forest fires in the mountains of Montana, and then started his own business. Another is a ska musician. He has dreadlocks down to his waist, and he began a music streaming service. Another of the favorite entrepreneurs is only 17 years old. Anybody can do this. You don't even need to be particularly smart. Some of the best innovators I know are not the A students or the B students, they're the C students. They're the people who've managed to get through school but have not yet had all the risk-taking squeezed out of them. So if you don't need to be in Silicon Valley, you don't need special training, you don't need to be that smart, what do you need? And I think it boils down to just 2 things. I think, first and foremost, you need to have a tolerance for risk. And I don't mean scary, dangerous risk, like the picture might say. I mean the type of risk-taking that comes from something as simple as starting down a path without knowing where it's going. Trying something without knowing in advance how it might turn out. Just 2 days ago, I have a perfect example of personal risk when someone said, you should try this thing. It's called a durian. Now that is risk-taking. But you can't just take random risk. You need to have some guidance behind your risk. And you need to have an idea. You need to have a direction. But it does not need to be a big idea. Mark Zuckerberg, who started Facebook, he just wanted to meet girls. And look what happened. My son was only 8 years old when he started his first company, when he realized the candy bar that he could sell for $1 at school could be bought for 10 cents the day before at the grocery store. Just simple candy arbitrage. It doesn't need to be an original idea. People have been selling books since they invented the printing press. But think of the innovation that's come out of this simple little bookstore. They've been renting cars since they invented the wheel. But we're seeing amazing innovation now in transportation, with Uber and Grab and relay rides and self-driving cars. It doesn't need to be a complex idea. The Post-it note, just a piece of paper. But this little piece of paper sells more than $1 billion a year. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it doesn't even need to be a good idea. Because, after all, what is a good idea? Now, when I told my wife the idea for what became Netflix, she thought it was the stupidest thing she'd ever heard. But we've all had that experience, right? Where you wake up and you have this incredible idea, and you come rushing into the kitchen and tell your spouse, or you come rushing to the office and you tell your coworkers, or you tell your employees, or you tell your boss, and then what do they say? That will never work. That's quite helpful, isn't it? Because of course then they tell you all the reasons it's so stupid. Why is it so hard to tell a good idea from a bad idea? Why does everyone get it wrong? Well, to help understand that, I want to introduce you to somebody. It's a gentleman named William Goldman. Now, you probably don't recognize that name, and I'm not surprised. William Goldman is a Hollywood guy. He's a writer. In fact, he writes screenplays. And maybe if you don't know his name, you may know his work. People of my generation, he wrote a movie called Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I'm not sure whether that made it here. People who are a bit younger might know a movie called The Princess Bride. He's written probably 24 movies in all. He's won 2 Academy Awards. But ironically, the thing that William Goldman is most famous for writing is just 3 words. What he wrote was this: nobody knows anything. Nobody knows anything. Now, he was talking about Hollywood and about how nobody knows how well a movie's going to do until after it's done it. That you could have the most bankable stars in the world. You can have an A-list director. You can have a great script, a huge budget, and end up with a complete flop. Or you can have a first-time director. You can have amateur actors. You can have no script at all and end up with a movie like Blair Witch Project, which I think cost about $35,000 to make and has grossed more than $250 million. Nobody knows anything. It's true in Hollywood, but it's true pretty much any place people are coming up with ideas. I mentioned before that Netflix was just one of 7 startups. But if you had asked me on day 1, which of these companies would be a big multinational success, which one would go out of business, which would be acquired, which would be a mediocre success, I promise you I could never have told you which would be which. And neither could anybody else, because truly, nobody knows anything. So if you take away nothing else from this afternoon, I want you to take that away. Nobody knows anything. If you tell them your idea and they don't like it, nobody knows anything. But you can't just leave it there. Because if nobody knows anything, you can't just stop. You have to do something. You have to take that risk I was talking about and do something. You have to try something. You have to test something. You have to build something or make something or sell something. The reality is you're going to learn more in one day of doing it than you will in 6 months of thinking about it or of doing a slideshow about it. And don't even get me started on writing business plans. There's an expression we have in Silicon Valley that no business plan ever survives a collision with a real customer. So you've got to take that idea and you've got to get it out of a business plan and get it out in the real world as quickly as you can. But it has to start with the idea. And for some reason, people get all stuck on where ideas come from. But, of course, I'll give you some advice that there are, in fact, some easy ways to find ideas. Those of us in Silicon Valley have a few tried and true techniques. We'll do things like look at new technologies, look at mobile, Internet of Things. My most recent startup was a big data startup. We'll look at current trends like healthcare or education. We'll look at new business models and see if we apply this new business model to an old business. But there's a much, much easier way for every single person here to come up with an idea, and come up with an idea today. And it's as simple as this. You just need to look for pain. You need to train yourself to see the world as an imperfect place, to ask what's wrong. But I don't want you to look at world global problems. Look at things you know. Look at your job. Look at your department. Look at the things that you do every day or that your customers are having problems with. And once you've trained yourself to see all these imperfections, you can't help it. Ideas will just pop in your mind. Now, I'm going to give you an example. I don't just want you to take my word for it. I'm going to use an example of a job that I had. And it's a job I had a long time ago when I was in the university. And I was a house painter. And this was quite a while ago. And back then, technology was primitive. We had no internet. We had no personal computers. We had no Wi-Fi, no streaming videos, no DVDs, none of that stuff. And in fact, this was almost 40 years ago. When you went to buy paint at a hardware store, the paint used to come in a container that looked like this one. I know, it's 40 years ago. It's pretty primitive. Now, let's fast forward to just a few months ago when I was painting my daughter's bedroom, and I drove to the hardware store to buy the paint. And now it's a different world. We have amazing technology advances. We do have the internet. We have web browsers. We have self-driving cars. In fact, we have all those things in the same place. We wear computers on our wrists. And now, when you go to a store to buy paint, now it comes in a container that looks like this one. 40 years, no change. Now, is that because this is the best possible way to sell paint? Well, I hope not. Because anyone who's painted knows how flawed this can be. To start, you have to get this thing open. And it requires a very special tool. You know, like the screwdriver. Now, can you imagine other consumer products that you had to have a screwdriver to open? The milk or, I don't know, your morning breakfast? Crazy. But it's okay. I do have a screwdriver. So now I can pry off the top of the can. And I have to take this lid, it has paint on it. I've got to carefully put it to the side so I don't step in it. But now I've got to stir the paint. But luckily, they've developed a very special tool for stirring paint. It's called a stick. You can see it up there, and you can use that. It actually stirs the paint pretty well. But then I pull it out, and now I've got a stick covered with paint, and I've got to carefully put it someplace I don't step in it. But now I've got to pour the paint. And you can see this can has an easy pour spout. No. But it's okay, I can do it. So I carefully tilt the can and the paint pours into my paint tray. And then I tilt the pan back up and two things happen. One, unless I'm really careful, paint spills down the side of the can, where of course it gets in my hands and on my legs and on the floor. But worse, some of the paint fills up this little lip that the lid seals into. More about that in a minute. I will not go into the actual painting about how you have to put down drop cloths. You've got to put tape on your windows. You've got to put on one color on your trim, and you've got to use a roller, and you can't tell where you've painted. And then you've got to try and clean up by pulling this soggy roller off. The whole thing is a disaster. But I'm finished now, and I've got a little paint left in my tray. So I carefully pour that back in the can. And now, of course, I've got to seal up the can. And isn't it perfect that if I needed a screwdriver to open it, I need another special tool to close it, called a hammer. So I find my hammer, and I put the lid on the can, and I give it a few good hits with the hammer, and I'd forgotten about that paint that was in the lip, which of course sprays all over my legs and all over the walls and all over the floor. Ugh. Now, as I told that story, maybe there was some of you out there who were thinking, this is crazy. Why don't they sell milk? Sell paint in a container like milk comes in. Or even better, like the container that we sell laundry detergent in. Or there must be some resealable container better than this one. Or why isn't there some device in the bottom which automatically stirs it? Or why isn't there a lid that you buy afterwards which goes on with a spout on it which reseals? Or why isn't there? Or why couldn't we? Or why don't I? Or why is no one? Hopefully, as I was telling you the story of the paint, you had ideas just popping in your head without even trying. And this is for something that happened to me. And imagine what will happen when you train yourself to look for ideas with things that are happening to you. You see, ideas do not spring out of thin air in some eureka moment. The idea for Netflix, for example, did not come from some moment of anguish over a late fee on a movie. We were looking for that idea for a long time. It was buried in a big pile of bad ideas, and we didn't even find that idea in a video store. We actually came up with the idea for Netflix when we were carpooling. Now, this story goes back even further. More than 20 years ago, when two friends and I had started a very small software company. And we were working happily on it. There was 9 of us all together. And then a few months later, 6 months later, a wonderful thing happened. Our little company was acquired. It was purchased by a much bigger software company. And this was a great thing. Our investors made money. Our stock options all of a sudden were worth something. And we all got jobs with this new, bigger software company. But there was 2 bonuses. One is that the person who had started this bigger company was a gentleman named Reed Hastings. And the second bonus is that it turned out that Reed lived in the same town that I did. And so the 2 of us began driving to work together each day. And we became pretty good friends that way. And we drove back and forth to work each day for nearly 6 months. And then lightning struck again. An even bigger company bought our big software company. And again, it was great news. Our investors made even more money. Our stock options were worth even more. But the best news is that I was going to get fired. Now, don't feel sorry for me, because I wasn't going to be fired in that walk of shame way where you're walking out with all of your desk things, kind of sneaking out the back door. I was being fired in that wonderful Silicon Valley golden handcuffs way, where they bring you into the office and say, Mark, due to redundancies and overlaps and responsibilities, and of course you just begin zoning out, you know what's coming. But then you go, wait a minute, this sounds different than what I expected. So you need me to come to work every day for about 6 months. I said, yes, that's correct. And I'm going to have my office and my fast internet connection and my whiteboard. Yes, of course. And you're going to keep paying me, and my stock is going to keep vesting. Yes. But you don't need me to do anything? I said, well, yes, you could say that. And I said, well, sign me up for that job. I'm going to use those 6 months to start my next company. But I needed an idea. Now, luckily, Reed Hastings was in the same boat. He was also being let go. He also had 6 months. He didn't want to start another company. He wanted to go off and become an educational philanthropist. But he was an entrepreneur, and he wanted to kind of stay involved. So we came to an agreement. We'd come up with an idea together, and that he would fund it, I would start it and run it, and away we'd go. But we needed that idea. And here's how we looked for the idea. Every morning, Reed would pick me up in his car at my house in Santa Cruz, and together we would drive up and over the Santa Cruz Mountains to our office in Sunnyvale. It's a commute of about 50 to 60 minutes. And on the ride, we'd brainstorm ideas. We'd look for pain, we would look for new business models, we'd talk about current trends, we'd use all the techniques and come up with ideas. And then I would take those ideas and I'd go to my office and I'd spend the whole day researching those ideas. And at the end of the day, I'd get back in the car, and together we'd drive back home to Santa Cruz, and I would tell Reed everything I had learned. And we did this with hundreds, literally hundreds of ideas. And some were pretty good, some were pretty bad. And we learned an interesting thing about ideas. We learned that the half-life of an idea is very short. And by half-life of an idea, I mean simply that if you started off on Monday morning and you had 16 great ideas, that just one day later, you probably had realized that half of them were bad. One more day of research, cut it in half again. By Thursday, maybe you had 2 of your original ideas left, and if you were lucky, maybe one of those ideas was still around by the end of the week. Now, of all these hundreds of ideas, one of the ideas was video rental by mail. But this was almost 20 years ago. And maybe you remember that 20 years ago, when you wanted to watch a video, it came on a VHS cassette. Big, heavy, fragile. So it didn't take me much research to realize, bad idea. And on to the next one. Until about a month or 2 later, where someone told us about a new technology called a DVD. It was small, it was thin, it was light. And that gave Reed and I an idea. So we turned the car around in the middle of our commute. We went to downtown Santa Cruz to a used record store and bought a used music CD. Then went 2 doors down to a stationery store where you'd buy little envelopes. And we bought a little pink gift envelope, the kind you'd put a greeting card in, put the CD in the envelope, addressed it to Reed's house in Santa Cruz, went up the steps of the Santa Cruz post office and dropped it in the mail. And the very next morning, when Reed came to pick me up, he didn't even need to say anything. He just held up a little pink envelope with an unbroken CD that had gotten to his house in Santa Cruz in less than 24 hours for the price of a stamp. And then we said, wow, there might be something here. And then my days changed. Now, rather than looking for an idea, I had a pretty good one, or so I thought. And I just needed to really validate. And so I did all the research I could. How many DVD players had been sold? How many DVDs were there? What were they going to cost? What kind of website would I need? How many people? How much time? But I couldn't answer the one question that was the most important one, which is anyone going to care? There was no other DVD by mail company I could look at. So we got to that point that every innovator gets to, where you have that path, but you can't see around the corner. You have to take that risk. And Reed wrote us a check for $2 million. We rented a small office. I hired 10 people, and we spent 6 months doing nothing more than building a simple e-commerce website. And on April 14th, 1998, we launched this little company called Netflix. Now, the Netflix of 20 years ago looks nothing like the Netflix you know today. To start, it was DVD only. There was no streaming. If you wanted a movie, we mailed it to you. We put the DVD in that little red envelope and put it in the mail. There was not a lot of innovation. We had due dates. We had late fees. The only innovation, if anything, was that there was one DVD rental store serving the whole country. And we not only rented movies, we sold them. And in fact, we sold a lot of movies. We sold so many movies that by the end of our first summer, our third month, we had sold so many movies that it was 98% of our business. So we were doing great, but we were really unhappy. And we were unhappy because we knew that selling DVDs was doomed. It was a commodity. And that as soon as Amazon sold DVDs or Walmart sold DVDs, that the prices would go down, the margins would be cut to zero, and we'd be out of business. Now our rental business, that was kind of interesting. It had high margins, it was operationally complex, so defendable, but customers hated it. Nobody would do it. And if they did it once, they would never do it again. And worst of all, doing both these things at the same time was really complicated. Because some of the movies, you could rent them and sell them. Some you could only rent. Some you could only sell. It was complicated describing who we were. We sell DVDs. Oh, we rent DVDs. Just think of building a web page for this and how a warehouse would be set up. And we realized if we're going to succeed, we've got to pick one thing and do one thing well. But which thing to pick? Do I pick selling DVDs, which is paying 98% of my salaries, but is going to eventually go away? Or do I do rental, which if we can get it to work, could be a huge business? But right now, there was absolutely no hint that it might actually be something we could make happen. So, you probably can guess where this is going. Ultimately, we decided it was more important to take a big risk on a potentially huge business than to take the safe route that was eventually going to go out of business. And so in one day, we turned off all the selling of DVDs and bet the company that we could figure out rental. Now, I've got to point out that when you walk away from 98% of your revenue in a single day, it has a certain way of focusing your mind. And from that day forward, we were desperate to figure out this new renting of DVDs. And we had lots of ideas, and we were going to test all these ideas. And I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. So at first, these tests were works of art. I mean, we would do custom photography. We would lovingly craft every single word of copy. We would test the site, every link. We would stress test things. It would take us a month. And we'd test it, and it would fail. And we'd look at each other and say, we just wasted a month. We probably should go a little faster. So we do a test in 2 weeks, cut some corners, and it would fail. Wow, we just wasted 2 weeks. Okay, faster. Do it in a week. Faster. Do it in 2 days. Pretty soon, we were doing a test every single day. And then pretty soon, we were doing 3 and 4 tests in a single day. And as you can imagine, when you're going that fast, things are getting really sloppy. We're putting up the wrong images. Sometimes the images have the watermark still in them. There's misspellings, there's typos. We have dead links. Sometimes we crash the site. But we learned something really important by going that quickly. We learned that it doesn't make a difference. That if it was a bad idea, even spending a month constructing a perfect test didn't make it a good idea. But if it was a good idea, then even no matter how sloppy the test was, immediately customers would raise their hands and say, that's what I want. They would keep rebooting the site. They would all of a sudden try phoning us up, even though they didn't have a phone number for us. They would try calling and writing. They were showing us with their actions that this was a good idea. And then we knew what to fix. And it turned out there was a profound insight. The insight was that it is not about having good ideas. It's not about having good ideas. It's about building a system and a process and a culture for trying a lot of bad ones. Remember, no one knows anything. You can't know in advance what's the good idea, what's the bad idea. You've got to try them all. And the key is trying them all in a manner that allows you to do it quickly and cheaply and easily. That is what startups are phenomenally good at. They are organizations built to validate ideas quickly and cheaply and easily until they find one that works. That's the key. And the way to do it is to fake it. Now, you've all heard fake it until you make it, and you've all heard about minimal viable products. But I'm here to tell you there's a way to go even faster than that. There's a way to test your ideas without actually doing them. Testing them without actually doing them. It's doing a thing that I call validation hacking. Now you're probably going, what is he talking about? How do you test something without doing it? And I'm going to give you an example. And it's a company that I worked with many, many years ago called Easy Fridge. It's in San Francisco. A young entrepreneur. And one night, it was on a weekend, it was probably 1 o'clock in the morning, he was at a party, and something happened to him that happens to young people in America every Sunday and Saturday and Friday night. At their party, they run out of beer. And they began arguing about whose turn it is to go out in the rain and find an open store and buy more beer. And him being an entrepreneur, he said, aha, there's some pain. I have an idea. My phone knows where I am. My phone has my credit card stored. My phone can know all the open stores, who delivers. It knows my taste. Wouldn't it be great if I could just push a button and voila, the beer shows up? Now, in my day, we would have tested that idea by raising money. We would have hired engineers. We would have built a product. We would have done a launch. And it would have taken us 6 months and a lot of money. He didn't want to spend any money. He didn't want to spend any time. He didn't want to hire anybody. And he figured out a very clever way to test it without actually doing it. The idea was for an app, but he figured out a way to test it using nothing more than a business card. He printed up business cards that simply said, need beer? Call me, with his phone number. And he'd stand outside of buildings on Friday and Saturday night, and anybody coming in who looked appropriate, he'd hand them the card and said, hey, if you need beer, call me. He'd go back, he'd wait for the phone to ring, he'd get in his bicycle, he'd go to the store, he'd buy the beer, he'd go to the building, he'd put on a costume of a Viking, don't ask. He'd go up in the elevator and deliver the beer. And he tested his idea with a business card. And you know what he learned? Bad idea. All his customers were young, they were all drunk, the average order sizes were small, there was no repeat business. But by colliding his idea with the real world quickly and cheaply and easily, A, he learned it was a bad idea, but more importantly, he began getting ideas from his customers about potential good ideas. And he tried something else, and then something else, and then something else, until eventually he stumbled on someone asking him to deliver groceries to his refrigerator during the day. And lo and behold, that idea worked. And then he was able to raise money, start the company, and begin building it. And he knew it was going to work because he had tested it using nothing more than a bicycle and a business card. That's validation hacking. Now, Netflix, of course, was validation hacking like crazy. But there does come a time when eventually you're running out of money, you're running out of time, and Netflix was running out of both. But we had a few last ideas we wanted to try, after hundreds of ideas had been tried. Don't forget, we were mailing DVDs to people. And we had a warehouse with hundreds of thousands of DVDs in it. And we said to ourselves, this is crazy. Why are we storing the DVDs here in our warehouse? Maybe we should store them at our customers' houses. Let them keep the DVDs. And keep them as long as they want. When they want another one, they mail it back or replace it. We'd called it no due days and no late fees. But then, when they wanted to mail the DVD back, they had to come back to our website and pick another movie, which no one wanted to do. So we said, let's have them make a list, a queue, so we knew when one movie came in, what's the next one to go out. And rather than charging them each time they swapped a movie, let's make it a subscription. Let's just charge them automatically every month. These are three things that didn't seem to make any sense, but quickly, easily, cheaply, we tested it, and amazingly enough, it worked. It worked amazingly well. People told their friends. When we got to the end of the first month, they all kept going. Word of mouth propelled this thing. We realized that finally, 2.5 years in, we had finally stumbled on a business model that actually allowed us to be a rental by mail company. But if you had asked me on April 14th, 1998, on that launch day, Mark, what's the business model going to look like that eventually enables rental of DVDs? I never, ever could have said it looks like this. In fact, if you had let me cheat and given me a multiple choice, I probably could never have even picked this one from the lineup. Remember, no one knows anything. And nobody could have said, eventually, it'll look like this. And on April 14th, 1998, I wasn't even thinking anything about what might come in the future. On April 14th, 1998, all that I could worry about was, is this website going to work? Now, on that day, launch day, we had my small conference room, and at one end, we had a table set up with a computer with a screen a lot smaller than this one, and we'd rigged it up that a bell would ring whenever an order came in. And over on this side of the conference room, we had another table, and we had big champagne, bottles of champagne on ice, and big champagne glasses, and we were going to toast our success. And at 9 a.m., our CTO went over, and he hit a few keys, and we were live. And we all stood around expectantly, waiting for something to happen, until all of a sudden, ding! our first order. And we cheered, and we went, opening the bottles of champagne. And in the middle of pouring the champagne, ding, ding, 2 more orders. We had 3 orders. We were ecstatic, and we were clapping each other on the back. And then ding, 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 4 more orders. We couldn't believe it. 7 orders. Oh. And then as we were kind of toasting each other, it kind of dawned on us, boy, we haven't heard the bell in a while. Kind of quiet. Is this thing plugged in? And it turned out we had crashed all of our servers in the first 15 minutes of being in business. So my memory of April 14th, 1998 is not toasting my success with a champagne glass. My memory is pushing a shopping cart up and down the aisles of a computer electronics store while our CTO threw in all the pieces that we would use to limp our website along that first day. But we made it to the end of the day, and at the end of day 1, we had 100 orders, 107 to be exact. And I was blown away. I never expected 107 people to try this little company. That was my whole first month forecast. But then, 3 years later, when we finally worked out the no due days, no late fees, we had 125,000 subscribers. Even more astounding, I never imagined we'd have that many people using Netflix. But of course, now we have more than 125 million subscribers. Thank you to all of you, at least the ones who pay for it. But I am so completely sincere, never, ever in a million years could I have possibly imagined that Netflix would achieve what it's achieved. That we could be making our own TV shows. We could do our own movies. We'd have subscribers in virtually every country on the planet. That Netflix would even be a verb. It is the most unbelievable accomplishment that I could never have imagined happening. And people come up to me all the time and go, Mark, wow, you must be so proud of what Netflix has accomplished. And it's true, I'm proud, but I'm never quite sure what to be proud of. I mean, is it that I was smart? Well, no. I mean, as I hope I've explained to you, 99 out of 100 of my ideas were bad ones. But maybe I'm proud of something else. Maybe it's because I'm so persistent. Because obviously, you can't keep testing things and keep going without some degree of persistence. But that's not the thing that I'm most proud of. What I'm most proud of is something entirely different. I'm proud of my optimism. And I don't mean glass half full optimism. I mean glass overflowing optimism. I am an optimist. I'm a believer. I do a little bit of angel investing, and I'm going to share with you, I am a terrible angel investor. And I have no excuse. I know the technology, I can evaluate the teams, I can tell if they're adequately capitalized, but I've got a flaw. And the flaw is, I love every idea that I hear. I'll sit there and hear it all, and before I know it, I've grabbed the whiteboard marker and this just might work. And I can tell you, liking every idea you hear is a bad formula for being an angel investor. So, optimism. When I said earlier that you only need 2 things, I wasn't being entirely truthful. There's actually 3. So yes, you do need that tolerance for risk. Risk-taking is fundamental, not just for startups, but for anybody who wants to try something where they can't know in advance if it's going to work. Without risk-taking, without taking that first step, you never get any place. And yes, You do need to have an idea. In fact, as I hope you've understood from today, you don't just need one idea. You need to train yourself to come up with 100 ideas or 1,000 ideas. Because remember, nobody knows anything. You never know which one's going to be the one that ultimately solves the problem. So the thing that you do need, in addition to those two, is quite simple. You need to have confidence. You need to believe. You need to know that even though each time I've tried this, it hasn't yet worked, I'm confident that eventually I'm going to figure it out. The reality is that when you have a great idea and you tell your spouse or you tell your coworkers, your employees, your boss, and they tell you it will never work, unfortunately, most of the time they're going to be right. You have to say, this time it's different. This time I'm going to get it. Now, with that in mind, I want to introduce you to one more person. It's a gentleman named Nolan Bushnell. Nolan Bushnell is perhaps most famous for being known as the father of the video game. He invented a company called Atari. But he's since gone on to found nearly 20 companies. He's an entrepreneur's entrepreneur. But the reason I wanted you to meet Nolan this afternoon is because he said something that has always resonated with me. And what he said was this: everyone who has ever taken a shower has had an idea. But it's the people who get out of the shower, towel off, and do something about it that make the difference. Now, I've sat in your seats more times than you can imagine. I've been to conferences like this, and I know how it works. You spend the day, you exchange ideas, you hear people who stimulate your thinking, and you probably go, oh my gosh, I have this great idea I'm going to try. But then you get back to your office tomorrow, and you've got emails, and you've got calls to return, and you have the crisis of the day to deal with, and that idea, it's gone. So what I want your takeaway from today to be is that the next time you have that idea, I want you to get out of the shower, and I want you to towel off, and I want you to do something. Doesn't need to be big. Test something. Try something. Make something. And when you have that great idea, and you come running into the kitchen and tell your spouse, or you come into the office and you tell your coworkers, or your boss, or your employees, your great idea, and they tell you, that'll never work, well, then I want you to call me, because remember, I like every idea that I hear. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now open the floor once again to questions. So we'll take about 3 or 4 questions, if that's possible. Once again, just raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone. Okay, can we have a microphone up right here, gentleman in a black t-shirt? Just give us 1 second. Okay, whoever has a microphone, can you run now? Run down. Run this way. This way. You see the gentleman that's standing there? Run. Run to him. Thank you.
Maybe they have no questions. Maybe
He has a question, but no microphone. There he is. Okay.
Yeah, it's a question about Netflix. I'm a fan of Netflix. Yeah. I'm a subscriber for 2 years, and I like each details about the Netflix. Like the skipping, the subtitles, the titles, everything. But it's the story related to the painting. When it comes to the series, I always question why they don't have a translator to the other languages. You guys have only a few translators like Malaysian, Chinese, and English. Where is the Russian? Where is the Russian, guys? I want to watch it in Russian.
noted.
Next question, please. Next question, please. Okay, can we have a microphone? Second row here, please.
Before he does, I don't want to be so dismissive of it. The first thing I will say is I don't work for Netflix now, and so I don't have direct influence on it. But I can say that Netflix is considering itself a global company. And I think one of the most significant things we did is recognize that the world no longer is at a place where all it does is consume American cultural content, and that's the way it goes. We've recognized that if we're going to be successful internationally, we have to meet people where they live. And that means the stories, it means the directors, it means the actors, it means where they're filmed and produced. And yes, it will mean the languages as well. So there are issues in that we live in a world of legacy rights that were negotiated long before anyone anticipated global streaming. But as those rights expire, things are changing, and it will be not too long before you should be able to watch pretty much anything you want, made in your own country, made in your own region, made in your own language.
Yeah, Tansu?
Yeah, thank you. It's so inspiring. Listen to your talk. I come to know Netflix because to my children, and I watch what you call the Chosen Survivor. And just now I was telling our chief secretary, I say you should watch the Madam Secretary. So I want to ask you a question. Now you have 1.25 million viewers, 125 million viewers. There's 7 billion, population in this world. What is the appetite of the Netflix? And the second question is, for the Netflix to go forward, the technology is more important, your business model, or the contents is more important? Thank you.
So the first thing is Netflix recognizes we're just getting started. What you point out is correct. We have 125 million subscribers in a world population of many billions, which the great percentage of them are internet enabled. They carry a device for watching content in their pockets. There's a lot of road ahead of us, which I think is what makes Netflix so exciting. But the point you bring up is correct. It is not the technology. It is not the business model. It's storytelling. I can tell a quick anecdote, which is that when we began, as you heard, we sold DVDs. But of course, everyone recognized that eventually people would be streaming movies or downloading them. So we always had to say, what do we stand for? But if we had said we stand for being the world's best shipper of plastic, we never would have survived. If we had said back then, we're all about streaming, we never would have survived. What we said 20 years ago was we are all about finding great stories, because that transcends delivery. That if you want to watch it on DVD, we'll give you a good story. If you want to stream it, we'll give you a good story. If 10 years from now you can beam the movie telepathically into your fill-in, we'll do that too. But ultimately, we are hardwired as humans to respond to storytelling. From the times years and years ago where we all gathered around the fire and shared stories. And Netflix is just continuing that tradition.
Question?
Hi, Mark. My name is Kevin. I love how you talk about your optimism, not just a half glass full, but overpouring with optimism. Could you share with us a time where you had your doubts during your journey?
That would pretty much be almost every day of the previous 20 years. And it's true, one of the attributes of entrepreneurship and innovation is paranoia, is because everything you're trying is invisible to you what's going to happen, you always fear the worst. For example, just the example that I gave, where we decided we had to walk away from a successful selling business and bet everything on a business which was doing nothing, that was terrifying. And Netflix has done that over and over. And for those of you who work at larger established companies, quite frankly, it is the vulnerability, which is the lacking of that courage to say, I can't worry about protecting the past. The consumer only cares about what's happening now and in the future. And we've always had the courage to say we're willing to walk away from the things we know and risk it on the things we don't know, because that's where the world's going. Let's do one more, if that's okay.
One final
Hello.
question.
Hello, hi. My name is Rumaizan. Hi, my name is Rumaizan. I'm an entrepreneur, and when you're an entrepreneur, you put everything, your heart, your soul into your business, right? So, from an optimist like you to a skeptic like me, when I have an idea, what I do is that I tend to I put it through acid tests, to make it bulletproof, acid-proof, waterproof, everything. And at the end of the day, nothing gets done because I want a perfect idea, a perfect plan before I launch it. And it's harder to work with my own creation that I've been doing for so many years and change. Like you went from a selling business to a rental business. That's a complete change of business model. So for me to change anything, it's not only scary, it's out of the world. So how do you, what kind of advice would you give to a skeptic like me to safeguard, nurture, greenhouse that idea so that it can actually take off?
So it's great, because it goes directly to why I am here. Why did I fly halfway around the world to speak to you? And it's really because I believe my role on earth is to take people who have an idea. And I know there's some of you out there who have this idea you've always wanted to try, but you're scared. You're scared someone might steal your idea, or you're scared you won't be able to pull it off, or you're scared to take the risk. But if I can just convince, that's the wrong word, if I can just give a few people the confidence that that journey is so exciting, that it's worth it, then that's why I do this. My advice is you are never going to be comfortable. If you get yourself to the point you're comfortable with your idea, it's too late. You have to recognize that all the time you're thinking about it is wasted time. That the best thing to do is try it. And the huge advantage you all have is it's so easy today to try it. That the tools are cheap, everything's available. With validation hacking, you can try your idea tomorrow if you're clever about how to do it. So I really love that question, because it really speaks to what the point is. The point is, if you have that idea and you want to generate innovation in your life, in your company, in your country, it's all going to come from that risk-taking that comes from taking that first step. But I'm completely sincere. I am cheering you on all the way. And I really do wish you, every single person, the best of luck. And thank you again for letting me spend time with you this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Well done.